One of the most alarming things during the last few months of lockdown has, for me, been the sheer amount of opinions I've developed on things like hand sanitizer. You would not believe it, really, would you? I remember this place or that place as being the place with the floral hand sanitizer or the one that's a bit too alcoholic. I've got opinions about whether I prefer hand sanitizer to be hand operated or foot operated or even battery operated, as I came across yesterday. And I know exactly the way I like to apply it to my hands. It's right hand, then left hand, then back onto right hand, in case you're interested. Which, of course, you are not, because who could be interested about such things? I'm pretty worried that I developed such opinions on these matters. How many likes and dislikes I now have in my mind about such a boring thing as hand sanitizer. It's quite worrying, really. But these days, I guess it goes with the territory a bit. We spend a lot of time thinking about hand washing and cleanliness. We never would have imagined we could have done so 6 months ago. But there is an added benefit of all this, other than, of course, helping to prevent the spread of coronavirus, and that is it really helps us to get into the mindset of some of the people we meet in our Bible reading today. You see, if you thought you spent a lot of time thinking about how you wash your hands, well, that is nothing compared to the Pharisees. They were obsessed with the matter. In fact, obsessed with cleanliness in general. They'd spend hours thinking about how to be clean. The debate amongst themselves, the proper ways to wash one's hands and how and when to do it. They wrote reams and reams about how they could keep themselves as clean as possible. They'd even approach travelling prophets like Jesus and harangue them about not washing their hands properly. That's why they come to Jesus in this passage, by the way. You might need to read a few verses back to see it. But they come to him and ask him about hand washing. It's particularly appropriate for us at the moment to read it, I reckon. But of course, the Pharisees' priority wasn't dirt. It wasn't even coronavirus. No, what they were worried about was something else. That was purity. About making sure they were absolutely 100% not tainted or contaminated, polluted or defiled in any way, so that they could be the proper members of the people of God. You see, for them, God's people had to be the best, beyond reproach, whiter than white. If you weren't, well, they had a word for that: unclean. You could become unclean in all sorts of ways. It wasn't really about getting muck on you, it was about other things as well. If you had leprosy or another serious skin disease like that, that would make you unclean. And we read about stories of that happening in the Gospels, don't we? That might be quite familiar to you. Eating the wrong kind of thing, pork being the prime example, that would make you unclean as well. That was a really big no-no, and a really difficult issue for the early church when they thought about it. Touching a dead body, that would make you unclean. So would touching someone who wasn't Jewish, as would sharing a cup or a fork or a knife with them as well. Even menstruating would make you unclean for a time. There were all sorts of rules about how you could purify yourself, what you had to do, how long it would take, and the rituals you might have to perform. Which for us, when we read it and when we learn about it, it does seem a bit OTT, doesn't it? But here's the rub of it. If you had contact with someone who was unclean, you would become unclean yourself. You would be tainted. To use an image that we've become all too familiar with, the Pharisees kind of thought uncleanliness was like a virus, really, which could be passed from person to person. This is why they butt their noses into Jesus' business. It's not because they're just busybodies, it's because they think they're performing a civic duty. They're trying to play their part into stopping the spread of uncleanliness. As you can see, they took it very, very seriously. And to be honest, for us reading it now, it's pretty easy for us to make fun of them for it. It doesn't really seem like a serious thing to us. They seem a bit ridiculous. I mean, it just seems odd, doesn't it? After all, we know what Jesus is going to say in a minute. It's all about our hearts. That's what counts. And so the Pharisees, well, they're figures of ridicule, misguided do-gooders, the kind of people who are quick to judge and to put others down with their silly rules. The thing is that I wonder how different they are from us. We think they are, aren't they? Aren't they surely very different from us looking at it now? But I wonder if they are. Well, here's the thing with the Pharisees, you see. Their intentions were good. They're going for a lot of criticism from Jesus, absolutely. But it's not because they're not trying. They want to get it right. They want everyone else to get it right as well. They want to be people who are absolutely tip-top. They want to make sure their spiritual I's are dotted and their devout T's are crossed. They have this amazingly high view of what God is like and what God's people should be like. They want things to be the best. And they're going to try really, really hard to get that right. Yes, when we read it, they often get it spectacularly wrong, but their intentions are usually good. So I wonder, are we really so different? I mean, are we so much better than they were? Are we actually just the same people making the same kind of mistakes? Think about it. We might not be very worried about sharing a mug with someone else, socially distanced, of course, these days. But we might be worried about seeing having a drink with this person or that. We might be worried about what it will look like if we're seen talking to that group of people for too long. But what will be said about our church if those people start coming, start playing a part in our life as a church? In fact, we might be very worried about what our church will look like if he or she, that person or this person, spends too much of their time in there, about what they might spoil because of who they are or what they do. It's as if they're bringing dirt in on their boots. Aren't these the same kinds of worries that the Pharisees had? Were they worried about when they talked about being unclean? This is the kind of thing that was really of a concern to us, and I wonder if it's of a concern to us as well. I've kept that quite vague, actually, because it's not about this kind of person or that kind of person. It applies to all of us. It's about our attitudes and about how we view other people. But if I've just confused you a little bit, I'll try this. And if I don't make things any clearer, then drop me a line and I'll try and make it even more clearer next week. Think about the kind of person you wouldn't want anyone else to know was your friend. The kind of person you wouldn't want to be seen with, or the place you wouldn't want to be seen at. We're not talking about people who are particularly bad or wicked, but the kind of thing that would spoil our reputation, perhaps, or the reputation of our church. The kind of thing we just want to brush under the carpet. The kind of people that we look down on. When we have those attitudes, we're quite like the Pharisees. It's kind of like we're rushing around trying to make sure everyone is the right kind of person, our kind of person. And we try and make sure that Jesus isn't spending too much time with the wrong sort. Certainly we're not going to. Well, here's the thing. Jesus spent quite a lot of time with the wrong sort of people. He spent time with people that everyone else thought weren't really up to snuff. Jesus spends a lot of time with people who everyone said were unclean. Does it all the time. He's known for spending time with prostitutes and tax collectors. We often hear that phrase, but think about it for a minute. And he has a reputation, Jesus does, for eating and drinking too much. Look at Luke 7 if you don't believe me. People call him a glutton and a drunkard. But Jesus touches people with leprosy. He touches a woman with an unspecified bleed, and here in today's passage, at the end of it, he speaks to this Canaanite woman. By the Pharisee standards, Jesus is defiled. His hands are pretty dirty. So what I'm wondering today is this. Are we willing to get our hands dirty as we follow Jesus? Are we willing to risk our reputation or the reputation of our church for following what Jesus is doing in our community? Because in the end, it isn't what we eat or we touch or who we spend time with that counts. It isn't what someone wears, their lifestyle or their reputation that matters when they walk into church. That stuff is all on the outside. In the end, what matters is our heart. What Jesus says Is that the problem isn't that we've got dirty hands by hanging around with the wrong kind of people. The problem is that our heart is corrupted. That's the problem. Why are we worrying about the dirt on our hands when our heart is black as soot? This, by the way, might be something of a shock to us as we read this passage. We expect Jesus to say, well, if you have pure intentions and a good heart, then you're clean, you're fine, you're okay, no matter what you look like on the outside. That's what we expect Jesus to say, and he kind of says that, but he kind of doesn't as well. Actually, Jesus says all our hearts are in an absolute mess. They're not in a good state. But the point is that this is a problem that we share with everyone else. It's not that we're okay and everyone else isn't. We're all in this mess. They are no cleaner than we are. Our hearts are no less corrupted than theirs. What Jesus is saying is that it's pointless to worry about who has washed their hands and who hasn't. If you've done it the right way at the right time, when what counts is our hearts and everything that comes out of them, well, it kind of matters because it's a right mess. All of us. We're in this boat together. This is why what Jesus does is so amazing. Remember what I said at the beginning about uncleanliness being kind of like thought as being contagious, that you could pass it on if you got too close to someone or spent too much time with them? Well, actually, no. Actually, with Jesus, it works the other way around. With Jesus, holiness is contagious. Purity is viral. Cleanliness and goodness and godliness spreads like wildfire. If you spend too much time with Jesus, you're going to end up being a little more holy. You're going to end up being a little closer to God just by being with Jesus. When Jesus touches our hearts, we don't mess him up. We don't contaminate him. He makes us right. And that spreads. That's why it's so important that we don't just stay with people who we think are like us, but we are a part of spreading goodness and holiness and purity and godliness around us. So rather than that slightly alarming list of things that we read in our gospel reading that Jesus mentions, he mentions murder and adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander coming out of us. It's a pretty disturbing list. But instead of that coming from our hearts, when Jesus is a part of our lives, different things come out of us. Love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. They pour out of our hearts because Jesus has set us right. To me, that sounds pretty amazing. What a difference that could make for our lives, the life of our church, the life of our community. This is the work of Jesus. This is what he can do in every single life, the life of you and me and anyone who we come across. This is what we're called to be a part of, spreading this goodness in others' lives and in our own life. But we're called to get our hands dirty. We're called to go out and be with people who might not look very like us, might not be our kind of people, might be people who give us a bad reputation, but we are called to go and get our hands dirty, to get our faces dirty, to look like we're in a bit of a mess, but our hearts will be absolutely right. And when we go out, Jesus goes with us. He can change hearts. His holiness and his purity and his love and godliness are viral, and they will spread into the lives of others, just as they've spread into our hearts. That is what we're called to do, to go and get our hands dirty for God.